Today's guest is Mitch Moore from Strong Wealth. And in this discussion, we are covering all aspects of Bitcoin and inheritance and strategies around that. We'll talk about trusts. We'll talk about why collaborative custody isn't the be all and end all. And we also spoke about how to structure your assets so that it is tax efficient and private, and the government can't necessarily extract more than you otherwise would if you held them in your personal capacity. We discussed that and a whole bunch more. Mitch Moore is a awesome dude with some great insights, and I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So many Bitcoiners have done all the hard work of storing their saved energy into Bitcoin, which we know is the scarcest asset on earth. And they spend so much time on that self-custody piece. And we think about all the redundancies. And in fact, sometimes I think we overcomplicate our lives way too much. I'm not a huge fan of single sig, but for like a lot of people, that's probably okay. That's the funny thing. But people don't think, well, what next? And I think the most catastrophic thing that can happen is one, your loved ones don't get your Bitcoin, but two, okay, assume you had a plan that they can, you don't get to decide what happens with it. The state's rules apply. So it is catastrophic on so many levels. So I think that neatly leads into kind of the topic of estate planning. So perhaps this would be a good opportunity to bring up the slide that you showed a little bit earlier. And for those who are just listening and not watching, it might just be worth just talking through what it is. And because you spoke about the three sort of pillars involved in estate planning and how this is specifically relevant to Bitcoiners.
Absolutely. So I will start before we get into the framework. Just where does every Bitcoiner need to start? And it is still the custody conversation. To your point, a lot of Bitcoiners are thinking through the custody problem whenever they're deciding to take that leap from moving it off an exchange into cold storage. And so they do a lot of their due diligence and homework, but they don't necessarily think about it from the perspective of how is this custody structure going to downstream affect my, the how my Bitcoin is treated legally when I pass away? How is it going to affect my inheritance protocol? How easy is it for my wife to be able to use? You can have the most secure custody structure in the world, but if your wife doesn't know about it or she doesn't know how to access it and use the Bitcoin, it doesn't matter. And so you really have to start here with any estate planning conversations around Bitcoin, because whatever the choice might be, that does affect the next, three things that we'll talk about related to the three primary pillars of a full Bitcoin estate plan. So, I've got the custody options down there of, all the way from the left hand side of holding on an exchange or at a custodian, through single sig with passphrase, multi-sig, collaborative multi-sig, and multi-institutional. Those are really all of the potential custody structure options available at this point, and they all come with trade-offs, unfortunately. It's not a matter of one size fits all. There's always one right answer as far as what is the best for one person. It's what is the best for you, and that could be, Bitcoiners will hate that I say this, but sometimes it is, for now, at least holding on River, an exchange. I would never hold on Coinbase and never recommend anybody to do it, or any of the other shitcoin exchanges that are promoting gambling these days.
Mm-hmm.
I would stick with Bitcoin only places that you can trust and are secure and have proof of reserves, which is why I love a River. And the other thing that I'll get into in a little bit later is, with an exchange, account, you can add beneficiaries, at least at River specifically. I love them if you can't tell. And that does simplify a lot of the legal side of estate planning around Bitcoin. So again, am I telling people not to take self-custody? Absolutely not. But make sure that when you do take the leap, you're at least considering, all of the options and the trade-offs of each. So make sure that this decision is not only thought through from the perspective of, security into the future, ease of use into the future, but also accessibility for your heirs, accessibility for your wife, and the privacy aspect of making sure that your Bitcoin is not going through the probate process, which I'm sure we'll get into. So start with the custody structure. But then here are the three downstream pillars of a complete estate plan around Bitcoin. Again, this is applicable to the United States. I'm sure some of these do apply to Australia where you're at. and
100%
wherever else.
in the same, 100%. So those are the key pillars I would say apply here in Australia too.
Wonderful. Awesome. So first is legal title. And really, this is the biggest overlooked aspect of an estate plan in Bitcoin because I think a lot of people, they're thinking about, to your point, the custody structure. And then they're like, okay, I've got these keys, I've got these backups now. I got to make sure at least, my wife knows about it to some extent. And hopefully she knows how to use it, which most of the time that's not the case. But the point is, with saying that, they thought through how do I transfer key possession from myself to the people in my family or whoever else is going to be getting this Bitcoin. The education piece normally lackluster with Bitcoiners, but at least they've said, hey, go into this safe. And this is where the Bitcoin is, or at least the information that you need to access it and send a transaction. But they don't think about the legal side. And some Bitcoiners mistakenly believe that they don't have to worry about the legal side. What I usually hear with some Bitcoiners that are very sovereignty, privacy minded, they're like, well, why don't, if I can just give the keys to my kids, like that takes care of it, doesn't it? And, it's one choice to make. I
Yes, and
think that,
indeed it is one choice. Perhaps not the smartest, but it is a choice. Yeah.
yeah, it's a very negligent choice because what happens is, the downstream of that is one of two things. You pass away and they get the keys. But by default, legally, what's supposed to happen to settle your estate is your estate's now going to go through the probate process. And along with that, there's a lot of pitfalls, a lot of things that Bitcoiners would like to avoid. If you're not going through the probate process and following the legal procedure, and you're trying to really keep this out under the radar, out of the system entirely, well, again, it's a choice, but the problems come down the road for your kids. And so what you do by that is you put a target on your kids' back, because what they're going to run into is all of a sudden they have a Bitcoin with no legal trail to say that they are the rightful owner. And so it might be KYC to you as the original owner. And then all of a sudden they go ahead and move it to an exchange to sell it to spend it one day. Maybe not. Maybe they wait long enough and we have enough peer to peer network built out to where they can go ahead and buy things without selling. That'd be great. But in the meantime, maybe they got to buy something and they do move it to an exchange to sell it. I've seen accounts get frozen, Bitcoin get frozen, because there is not that clear, trail to know that, hey, this person is actually the rightful owner. And you know, of course, as a Bitcoiner, like, do I agree that these institutions should have the ability to do that? Of course not. But it's the world we live in, and so, in my opinion, if we're really going to be sovereignty minded, we should use the legal frameworks and the legal structures in place to protect ourselves because they are there, and you can protect yourself with them. Let me take a break there before I continue
Cool.
continue on into
I
these
do
three
have one
pillars.
other a question here, Mitch. That's a good
Yeah.
point to kind of stop for the second. So, um, when you talk about transferring legal title, I think within the
Mhm.
context of Bitcoin held in your personal capacity, that typically entails a will, does it not? In order for you to transfer that title legally.
A will is one way that it can transfer. So that'd be good to just show the next couple slides here. So here's three primary ways that the legal title can pass from you to your heirs. It can pass by law if you commonly have joint ownership of property. So if you had a joint account at an exchange, for example, just think about traditional assets for a second. If you and your wife have a joint tenant account at one of these custodians, then that is an example of passing by law. If you own your house or some land and you guys are both on the title of that, well, that is an example of passing by law. But for Bitcoin specifically, there really isn't a way to have joint ownership if you're going to hold it in self custody. So then it goes down. Okay, it's either going to pass by contract or by probate. And that by contract is where a trust comes into place, or where you're adding beneficiaries takes care of that as well. If you hold on an exchange, you add a beneficiary to it, that is technically by contract. If you have a trust and the Bitcoin is assigned to the trust, then that is by contract as well, which we can get into the benefits of that. And then the third is by probate. So at least in the United States, and you can tell me if it's different for you, but at least in the United States, a will does still take your estate through that probate process. And so, is a will better than nothing? It definitely is, because the will does take care of other aspects outside of Bitcoin, like assigning guardianship. So if you have young kids and you pass away, you and your wife pass away, you're already laying out legally who's going to be the guardian of your children. And then you can also, by default, that person also becomes the steward of the assets as well. So you want to make sure you pick the right person and don't leave it up to the judge to decide that. But a will does not inherently help you avoid probate in the United States, and that's a common misconception among Bitcoiners as well. So what it acts as is, at least for us, is it acts as sort of an instruction manual for the judge. So a judge is going to say, okay, here's the will that they had. Another thing that can happen is a will can be contested.
Mm.
So, if, let's say you pass away, you had a will, but Uncle Johnny comes out of the woodwork out of nowhere and is like, "Hey, like, well, he told me that he was going to give me the Bitcoin and not the kids, or whatever." And there can be legal precedent for a will being overturned, and it not applying. But it's not common. But the other downfall of going through the probate is a couple things. It takes a long time. There can be fees, and it's a public process in the United States. So your estate and what was in your estate, both your liabilities and your assets, are now going to become public knowledge. And so while, yes, you might have laid out in your will that, hey, I want my kids to get this Bitcoin, great. They probably will get it. But someone could go search in the public records and see, okay, here's they had X amount of Bitcoin. Now I went to these kids. Let me look up where they live. Let me go get that Bitcoin. Uh,
Exactly.
you
That
know,
is a
uh,
problem here too, Mitch. Sorry to interrupt, but that's
yeah,
100% a
go
problem
ahead.
here in Australia, where similarly, for a relatively trivial fee, you can go and dig into kind of anyone's probate records. So from that perspective, you certainly don't want to be naming your Bitcoin explicitly to your beneficiaries. And I think the challenge that people have is, if you're like many of us and we have different stacks and we don't want to confuse mix our UTXOs, we got a stack for this kid and a stack for that kid. You ideally would like to be able to go, hey, I don't use Ledger, but let's say cold card A goes to this person, cold card B
Mhm.
goes to this person. But by doing so, what you're actually going to be doing is exposing them to an OPSEC risk. So, how does one, within the context of a will, and let's just strip out the idea of creating a trust or anything like that for the moment, let's say you hold Bitcoin in your personal capacity, what are some of the techniques that you've utilized and seen in practice to at least offer that degree of privacy, knowing that it's going to go through probate, same as here, while at the same time ensuring that it actually does get passed on? Because you can't just leave it out of your will.
Yeah, good question. And I'm going to be honest with you. We steer clear of it entirely here in the United States. So if someone comes in with a will or with nothing, they've done nothing. Around estate planning, we're going to go straight to a revocable living trust. And so, to be frank with you, I haven't spent too much time trying to figure out what would be the best way to phrase it within a will, in order to make this work. Obviously, most wills though are very general in nature, typically, unless you have like specific, you know, maybe sentimental property or something that you want to
Yeah.
go to people. But they are usually general in the sense of like, well, 50% of my assets go to this person, 50% of my assets go to this person, kind of thing. So you don't necessarily have to explicitly say, these UTXOs, or this Bitcoin, goes to these people. But however, you know, if you leave it out, then you have that generality, and you need to make sure that it's accounted for elsewhere. And so, yeah, like I said, for us, there's a lot more benefits that come with a trust over a will, and so we generally just default to going that route anyways.
So what you tend to do is if someone's got a relatively large position within Bitcoin and they come to you for advice, your generalized advice, obviously take into account their circumstances, would be like, you probably want to get that Bitcoin out of your personal capacity and transfer it into a trust today, right? So we'd call that a discretionary trust or family discretionary trust or whatever you want to call it here. So it's quite distinct from a testamentary trust. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Absolutely. Yeah, we refer to it as a living trust, a revocable living trust to be specific. There's irrevocable, revocable are two primary versions of trusts. I'm sure you probably know the
Mm.
difference with a law background. Revocable, the short and sweet answer is that you're still the trustee, you're the owner of the assets, you have control of the assets throughout your lifetime, and you can make changes to the trust itself throughout your lifetime as well. With irrevocable, you're usually kind of quote unquote setting that in stone. So you are actually giving up control, you're giving up ownership, and you're moving the assets out of your estate into an irrevocable trust. There's a ton of different types, not for this conversation. And you're really hands are tied then from then on out. You're no longer the owner of those assets, and the trust owns the assets. And whatever you laid out in the trust, that's exactly what's going to happen with those assets. So for
Sorry,
the
can I just
general,
interrupt a quick, well, one sec. Sorry,
yeah.
just to, and maybe you'll cover this shortly, but one of the advantages aside from asset protection and privacy, presumably is also the tax efficiency, right? Of being able to distribute to beneficiaries. And I'm assuming in the States, obviously the laws are different in each state, but generally speaking, you can distribute it amongst all the beneficiaries of that revocable trust, and they will be paying at their marginal tax rate. So you can, instead of distributing, say, 500K to you as an individual at your top rate, you might say, okay, I'm actually going to just distribute to four people who are all beneficiaries, and in doing so, save some tax. Is that sort of one of the other benefits?
A good question. This is a common misconception. So, on the revocable living trust side, it actually doesn't change anything from a tax perspective. So what happens is whether you do nothing, you've got a will, like doesn't matter. As long as the Bitcoin is not held within a retirement structure, a qualified structure. So we're take that off the table. Whenever you pass away with a revocable trust or nothing or will, let me be specific. Your heirs will receive what's called a step up in basis. So your cost basis throughout your life. Let's just say you bought 10 Bitcoin and you were early and your total cost basis for that was $100,000. Whenever you pass away, those 10 Bitcoin are worth $1 million, and it's going to your son. And so your son now, when he inherits that Bitcoin, his cost basis is now $1 million. So the day that you pass away, whatever the market value of the Bitcoin is, that is the heir's new cost basis going into their life. So if they theoretically, if they were to receive it and sell it right away, they pay no taxes on those gains that the original owner experienced throughout their lifetime. Now that is capital gains taxes. The lovely world that we live in, there's a lot of different taxes. The government loves to take our wealth. So
Oh, yeah.
the the flip side of that is estate taxes. So in the United States, there are some states. This is estate and state. I'm going to be saying that a lot, but there are some states in the United States that do have estate taxes. So whenever you pass away, the state is going to be taking a portion of your estate, assuming it is above a certain value. It's different for all states. Some states don't have it at all. So I'm not going to speak to those specifically. It's a consideration. The one that does apply to everyone in the United States is the federal estate tax. Right now, though, Trump has made those very high, for most people. So it's $30 million per married couple, $15 million per individual. And so if your estate is near that $30 million mark as a married couple, then okay, we need to start thinking about estate taxes and how do we layer trusts in order to avoid that estate tax. To do that, though, we would use irrevocable trusts, not revocable. So, if you remember just from earlier, for those listening, revocable, it means it stays in your control and you can make changes to it and you still own those assets. They're titled in the trust, but you're the trustee on it. So, you can benefit from them. Everything's fair game, just like normal. But irrevocable trust is where you're actually moving the assets out of your estate and you no longer control them. And because you've severed control, now whenever you pass away, those assets that were put into an irrevocable trust are not included in your estate value. So, if you're thinking about avoiding estate taxes, that's where irrevocable trusts come into play. But for everyone else, most plebs, we don't have $30 million net worth.
Yet.
Um, Yet, a lot of early Bitcoiners do, of course, and they have to worry about this. But for most people, they shouldn't worry about estate taxes unless those laws change. But as of now, I wouldn't worry about that because you're going to give the Bitcoin and it's going to receive a step up in basis with a revocable trust. So that's speaking to the tax side of things. If you have a question, I'll pause. If not, I'll just speak to the other benefits of a trust and why we go there.
No, I think you've nailed it actually, and it's funny that we're speaking today. At least on my side, 13th of May. We just had a budget, the federal budget last night here in Australia, and they've done two pretty horrific things that have led a lot of Bitcoiners to get quite emotional. The one is they've completely stripped away the 50% CGT discount that we had um, on
Oh,
all assets. So not just other than your primary residence, but on all assets, including shares, Bitcoin, investment properties, the lot. So, and what they'll be doing is now using CPI index as your sort of base cost, and then you'll pay on the full capital gain. And the other is for anyone who's got a discretionary trust, like a revocable trust, as you've described it. What we used to be able to do was be like you could have 10 different beneficiaries and distribute 200K to them, and it's 20K each, and then no one pays tax, and then you can just say, hey, give me 19 back, you keep one. Not that that's necessarily legal, but that's what people were doing. And
mhm.
now there's going to be a blanket 30% minimum tax payable by the trustee, and then there'll be some sort of tax credits on the side of the beneficiary. So they slowly are just closing the doors. And yeah, I just needed to get that off my chest, Mitch, because I woke up a bit emotional this morning. My wife just doesn't seem to understand or care as much. But anyway, so
Yeah.
continue on now about the benefit. So we've touched on the tax side. Talk about the other benefits of trust as you were describing then.
If you hold Bitcoin in self custody, let me ask you this. What happens to your stack when you're gone? My Bitcoin Will is the world's first will kit built for self custody holders. You can get it DIY with guided one on one support. And if you're not sure, there's a free diagnostic call to see what's right for you. And if you need a lawyer, I'll tell you straight. There's a link in the show notes. Otherwise, visit mybitcoinwill.com for more information. Now, back to the show.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I've heard Australia is one of the worst places, dude. Obviously, for me, I came to Bitcoin and really started to understand that I can't trust the government in many ways through COVID. And I think the response to COVID in Australia was significantly worse, even the United States. And at least me and my friends were up in arms
Yeah.
in the
Oh,
United States as well. So, I'm sorry about that. Maybe you can get out of there. But I don't know if the
this
United
is my
States is
plan
going
B,
to.
Mitch. That's the sad thing. I'm from South Africa, man. So this is my plan B. I've been here eight
Oh,
years, and now
man.
it's like I just put something out there on X today. I was like, maybe I should start now. I've got to think of a plan C.
There you
Because
go.
honestly, I think we're going to have a real problem. I mean, luckily, I say luckily, but Bitcoin hasn't done anything that I would have expected it to do within the last, say, 6 years that I've been in the space. I remember getting into it and thinking, geez, this thing is running like a freight train. It's not inconceivable that in 5 years it'll be $1 million. We haven't quite got there. So I haven't got as big a problem as I would have imagined. But I know that I will have a problem at some point. But also there's a matter of principle. And I guess as a Bitcoiner, you can identify with this, which is like, hold on, I'm a productive citizen. I pay tax on my income. I take the difference. I invest it. Then you want to clip the ticket again. You're basically just penalizing me for being, frugal and actually trying to plan for my future. And instead, the guy who's who's just been leverage long real estate, has been enjoying a free ride. And it's the most, it's very, very sad what's happened to this country. It's almost in many respects, think of what's happened to California. It's largely what's happened to Australia, except I'm in the Florida of Australia. I'm in the
Yeah.
freest, the more, I guess, conservative part of Australia, but it's not saying much. It's like it's different shades of gray. Um, but
Yeah,
anyway,
no.
it's still a wonderful place to live, and all things considered, I'm blessed to be here. But we'll see what happens next. Um,
Mhm.
Going back to trust now. Yeah, so we've touched on the benefits in terms of tax. Just briefly highlight some of the other benefits that
Yeah.
you would identify with a revocable trust in particular.
Yeah, there's two primary, privacy and control. So privacy is obviously very important to a lot of Bitcoiners, and it's not only privacy whenever you pass away; it's privacy during your life as well, which a lot of people don't realize. The privacy when you pass away is you're avoiding probate. So you're not going through that court process. Your estate is not becoming public information. It is passing by contract to refer back to the language and the presentation that I shared. And so you get that privacy upon death, but you also get the privacy while you're alive because you can title the trust something completely unrelated to your name, like ABC Trust. Whatever you want to name it, you can name it that. And a lot of people they don't take that opportunity. They don't take advantage of that. They end up naming it their family name, and usually then they will also title their house in the trust. And so somebody can look up, well, who owns that house? And you may have done the hard work to set up a trust, but now it's for me, Mitch Moore Family Trust. It's like, oh, there you go. So that's another benefit of having a trust is you can really take your name off of the property that you own and have it be something that is seemingly completely unrelated to you. So that gives you that privacy benefit so that it's harder to find out where you might live and what you might actually own by people who are using these public databases to try to track that information down.
Yeah.
Um, so that's on the privacy side. And then on the control side, it really comes down to what do you want to happen with the funds whenever you pass away. So that might be giving part of your assets to your kids when they turn 18, but the rest of it at 25, for example. Or, you can more clearly get detailed as far as like, oh, I want, X amount to go to this charity over X amount of years, or maybe it goes into another trust that pays out a distribution to whatever. I think you get the point. You really have the ability to construct it in any way that you would like based on the circumstances that you're in. And so those are the primary benefits of including or utilizing a revocable living trust over doing a will or nothing. The other thing that also gets forgotten about related to these trusts is a will does not kick in until you pass away. And there's incapacitation planning that must be done with a lot of folks as well. And so that's the scenario where maybe you get into a car accident, you and your wife were on a drive, whatever, and neither of you can make your own decisions for yourself, or maybe one of you can, one of you can't. And so planning for those scenarios where I'm not passed away, so my will would not kick in yet, I'm still alive, but I can't make any of my own decisions. That stuff needs to be ironed out as well, and that can be done through more easily through a trust, powers of attorney, etc. So those are the primary benefits and why we typically just default to the trust route rather than going to a will in the first place.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And I suppose for anyone listening, what I would say just generally is the law's hyper specific to where you live. So you've got to do your own due diligence and figure out what works. Obviously, stateside, that seems to be the most sensible approach, but not necessarily everywhere in the world. And then the last sort of benefit that, like, just from a legal perspective, that I quite like about trusts is that asset protection
Mhm.
piece. If for whatever reason you find yourself in a litigious situation. Somebody wants to sue you. It's like, good luck. You can't get anything from me because I own almost nothing. That's kind of a smart, that'd be a good reason if you're worried about getting sued. I mean, it's not something that I'm particularly concerned about generally, but it is a nice benefit. All right. So I think I like how we
Yeah.
sort of tied up the legal piece within your presentation. That's sort of like the stuff that you need to get done on the legal side to ensure that that title actually transfers to your beneficiaries as you intended to. The next part is, of course, transferring those private keys. And as I've described this problem to people, is you live as a Bitcoiner to protect your private keys with as few surface areas that could make them vulnerable as
Yeah.
possible during your lifetime. But then you need a system in place in order to ensure that the people who need to know, whether it's your executor or whether it's your beneficiaries, can actually get hold of it. Otherwise, you obviously just donate it to the network. So give us a little bit of a flavor of how you approach that problem of protecting it during your lifetime and then subsequently disclosing it to who needs to know, and what are the and does it actually change for different setups, whether it's multi-sig, single sig, etc.
Yeah, sure. So I feel like the biggest misconception here is that collaborative custody solves this problem, and in my opinion, it doesn't. What does solve the problem is an inheritance protocol that's properly documented and communicated. To your point, just by nature of at least in the United States, Unchained is very popular. I don't know what if they are in Australia or not. I'm not sure.
Mm.
Unchained, similar setups. The Bitcoin holders holding two keys, the institution that they're collaborating with, the third party is holding a third backup key. And so, they have some mechanisms in place for your heirs to be able to reach out to them and get some assistance. But that alone does not completely solve this. So, the first thing that you have to do is really this is where the custody conversation comes into play. What is going to be the most secure setup that does not prevent the people that I want to access it and actually use it, distribute it, whatever that looks like, from doing so? And so, we go through the gamut. We have a Bitcoin custody framework that we use with all of our clients that goes through all of those custody structures that I just mentioned before, where we're talking through the trade-offs of an exchange. Of course, I think a lot of people listening to this are going to know it. As far as I could, the exchange could go bankrupt. We've seen FTX, Celsius, BlockFi. I mean, numerous
Yeah.
exchange hacks in the past. I mean, those are the primary risks. We have rehypothecation risks, of course, that don't necessarily, lead you to losing your Bitcoin, but it could, if they get caught with their pants down. So there are those risks, but the benefits, as I mentioned earlier, are okay if you have a trusted institution, which again, I know that's the whole point of Bitcoin is to not trust any third parties, and not trust other institutions and be able to take that personal responsibility and have sovereignty over your wealth. 100%. But if you lose it, it doesn't matter. You're not sovereign anyway. So,
Yes.
be honest with yourself. Like, I think a lot of people, they like the idea of self custody because they don't want to feel like a fraud Bitcoiner. The not your keys, not your coins. I mean, that has been repeated so many times in the Bitcoin space that I feel like Bitcoiners feel like they're fake if they're not self custodying their Bitcoin. Um, and I get that. There's a journey that you have to go on, and AC, who I spoke with on my podcast recently, he's a great guy to reach out to. You said you're a colleague of his, so maybe you're helping people in this regard as well with
Yeah.
their custody structures. There's other folks out there. Reach out to these people before you decide to willy nilly do this on your own, because what we often see is people will have done it, but they have, maybe a ledger. They did. The point is they didn't choose great hardware. Maybe it's a hot wallet. It's not air gapped. It's not in cold storage. Or maybe they try to go the other route, where it's entirely too complex, even for themselves or for for their heirs. So they're maybe having their own multi-sig, where they have buried a key in their backyard and they've, done other things with the other two keys, or maybe they try to do a 3 of 5. Like, just people will get crazy with this stuff, and it's like is that really necessary? You might be able to do it, but if somebody else can't put all these puzzle pieces together, then it really doesn't matter. So deciding that first and doing it with um, a trusted, objective source is a really good option. And I say objective specifically because a lot of these companies will just shill whatever they provide. If it's multi-institution, they're going to sell you on that. If it's collaborative, they're going to sell you on that. So reach out to people that you know they're agnostic to the actual custody structure, and they're really there to just educate you. Would be my biggest encouragement if someone's feeling uncomfortable about it. Don't willy nilly do this because there's no safety nets, there's no backstops here.
Hey, Bitcoin self custody holder, are you worried about your setup or keen to level up? Master Bitcoin self custody the right way with Bitcoin Mentor. There's a link in the show notes for a no obligation free discovery call. Now, back to the show.
As you said, if you want to donate to the network, by all means. But I don't think you want to, and I don't think your kids would like that. Your wife would like that either. If you're doing that with a lot of your wealth. So I know that was a very high level. We can continue into what does it look like. I could even share a template that we use with our clients if you'd like as well. But where would you want to go from there?
Yeah, I think that'd be great because I fully agree with you that you know Bitcoin ownership's on a spectrum, and so even though it is like contrary to what I would recommend on average, I think the ETFs are actually good enough for a lot of people because they just
Mm.
never going to take personal responsibility and do this thing properly. And
Yeah.
then in terms of the solutions, absolutely. I think it's self-evident that more Bitcoin gets lost from people getting in their own way than from people stealing it. Like $5 inch attacks are what we kind of optimize around, but in reality, I think it's
Mhm.
you. And so
Yeah.
I'll give an example, like passphrases, hate them. Like I know that they're valuable. I know they're great as decoy wallets and all that kind of stuff, but
Interesting.
hate them because I've had a bad experience with one where I thought I've got a passphrase that is absolutely going to stick in my mind forever. And for like half a day, I couldn't remember it. And then eventually I found a scrap
Mhm.
of paper and I was like, what made you think of that? That's your passphrase, And I was like, I thought,
Yeah.
never forget this. So no,
Yeah.
I actually don't trust myself at least with the passphrase. But yeah, I think to your earliest point, like there's no solutions, only trade-offs. And it is interesting what
Yeah.
you say in the sense that people tend to think that the collaborative custody models are like the silver bullet, like, oh, we've solved this problem. In reality, you're still looking after two keys. And if you screw that up, it doesn't matter what these guys have, their protocols and the process in the background, they can't save you. You've still got to save yourself. And so
Yep.
I would be curious now to understand exactly how you go about conveying that information from an individual who holds Bitcoin to, I guess, the right people. I mean, and would that be the equivalent of an executor or the beneficiaries, or would it be like a firm like yourself who would be appointed by the testator as being their trusted? I'm going to use this term because I use it in this product that I've developed called a digital asset advisor. Someone who's my trusted
Mhm.
digital asset advisor. So yeah, talk to us
Nice.
about that piece, and if you've got anything to share, feel free to bring it up on screen.
Sure, happy to. Yeah, let me go ahead and share this here really quickly. Dun, dun, dun. All right. So this was the legal title stuff. We'll continue on through this. So what we're really talking about here is facilitating that key possession, which is really the second big pillar of how do I make sure that no matter what happens to me, my wife, my kids, executor of the estate, whoever that's going to be, it's got to be trusted people that are actively going to be either they are the direct beneficiaries of the Bitcoin, meaning they are now the owner after you pass, or if it's someone you trust to facilitate this, whether that's a professional or it's a friend or it's a family member. Maybe they are not directly involved in receiving the money themselves, but they are in charge of making sure that everyone else does get it. That's really up to you at the end of the day. You have to trust somebody. If you don't have anyone in your life, then maybe the inheritance isn't as big of a deal to you. But if you do have people in your life, then you do have to make that decision to trust them. You don't need to give them the information too early, per se. A lot of people are worried about that. Of, well, are you telling me I got to give my private key information, my seed phrase, to this person? Absolutely not. But you at least have to let them know where they can find the information to be able to at least get there, where whatever that might be. So if that's, okay, here's the code to my safe, and within the safe is instructions on going to this safety deposit box and then accessing the key backups, great. But they do have to know. If they don't know about it at all, then again, doesn't matter. You're contributing to the network. So, what's included in a Bitcoin inheritance protocol here? Just go on the left hand side. Everything someone would need to know to access and transact with your Bitcoin. You need to have that documented somewhere and in some way. If you don't have that documented, then that probably means that you also don't have proper backups in place for your wallets, and you should have those in place. Trust and estate documents. So if you've laid out, if you have a trust, if you have a will, whatever that is, whatever that's going to be for you, whatever you land it on, those documents do need to be in there, and they need to be able to access those. Location and the information of all hardware and key backups needed. So, okay, if I've got my cold card, here's where it is. Here's how to access it. If there's a pin on it, great. If there's, also passphrase you put on you're on your wallet, they need to know that. They also should know their wallet coordinator details, and it'd be ideal to have the configuration files as well, so that they could reconstruct the wallet if they need to be able to do that. A lot of people probably won't know how, so including instructions on that might be important. Or this is where I prefer to just include the contact information of a professional. So whether that's us, with our clients, that's a no brainer that they're going to put in our information on there and just say, hey, reach out to these guys if you aren't sure what to do, or can't make something happen. If that's for somebody else, and your family or people that you're working with, great. If it's a lawyer or somebody, like if they're familiar with this stuff, like, as long as you can trust them and you know that they know how to do this stuff, that's fine. And then if you do have institutional partners, if you're doing, kind of collaborative or multi-institutional, or you're on an exchange, obviously your heirs, your executors, they need to know who are those partners that are involved. What is the login information? What do they need to know in order to at least be able to say, hey, the owner has passed away, provide that death certificate documentation, and then follow the processes of whatever that custodian or institution lays out. So that's what's included. I can also go through a template that we use with our clients. How to secure it. Fireproof home safe is great. You may also, you want to usually hold your wallets and your backups in different places. So maybe you have a safety deposit box, or you have, part of your seed phrase backup with a trusted friend or family or whatever that is. You may not give them the entire thing, but you might give them a portion of it. There's really a lot of ways to slice this. But just making sure that you have these places that are secure, you'll be able to access them, and typically there's not going to be any third party access to those areas by people that you don't trust.
Until you die,
So
presumably.
until you die,
Yeah.
absolutely. um
Okay, no,
of
that's
course.
awesome, Mitch. I think what you've described is really sensible in the sense, and it aligns with what I've been telling people, which is, I guess, very encouraging from my perspective, because you need to tell them either explicitly or implicitly how to access your Bitcoin, which means your private keys, obviously. So you could be, implicit, which is like, go to this vault and then go to this vault and then grab this instructions from here, and then you can actually put it all together. Or you could literally, if it was as simple as, well, my seed phrase is in this vault, and there it is. So you just need to
Yeah.
make sure that whoever needs to know can actually access that. And I do agree that ultimately you're not solving this issue by saying I've at least got a collaborative custody partner, because unless they can literally control your keys, which the majority of them take pride in saying we don't, then I think what there are is really insurance, which is a great product, but it doesn't solve this issue. Okay, awesome. I'm very conscious of your time here, Mitch. So I think what you've described is really awesome. I'd love you to just touch on the education piece, because this is another issue that I think is really important. Not just the education of the heirs, but also those who are going to be administering your estate. So just talk to us here about the kind of the most important aspects of education and why this is sort of the third leg of a proper estate plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because at the end of the day, if they are the rightful owners, meaning they have legal title, so you've taken care of the trust, will, whatever that is, even if it went through probate. If they have Bitcoin and they have the legal title to it, and they also have the keys, they're in possession of the private key material. Okay, great. Now what? And a lot of people, at least the folks that I talk to, um, if they're married, it's usually the guy who's the Bitcoiner in my experience, not always. But it usually is. And the spouse loves the Bitcoiner, doesn't care so much about the Bitcoin, and they're tired of hearing about it. So, they probably, don't understand why you were so bought in to Bitcoin. They may not understand why you believe it's a generational asset and they should continue to hold it for decades. They may not know how to implement it into their own financial plan. And so, you need to capture um, the thesis to some extent of why you believe this is what they should do with the Bitcoin and why, how they can implement it into their financial lives. Some documentation around the components of a Bitcoin wallet and how to send a transaction might be good. Clear do's and don'ts, whatever that is. If it's, hey, don't, if somebody calls you and is asking for this information, don't give it to them to avoid scams, like stuff like that. That's going to be great. A lot of these people, a lot of the people in our families and in our lives, they're not going to care until it's time to, meaning they're probably not going to do a lot of this work up front, unfortunately. But whenever they have, Bitcoin that's now theirs, suddenly it's a lot more important to them. So, whatever the resources are that you may have used in order to get up to speed on Bitcoin, whether that's from a technical perspective and self custody, or maybe it's just from, the other maybe monetary or financial perspectives of Bitcoin. Maybe just include those. If it's books, videos, podcasts, whatever resources that might be, trusted professionals. So obviously us as a financial planner, maybe it's an attorney, maybe it's your CPA, whatever that is, you can say, hey, these guys, they know what they're talking about. I trust them. You can reach out to them if you have any questions. And then finally there, I've already touched on it a little bit, but this is intentions. What was your intention for the Bitcoin? What should it be used for? How long should they hold it? What situations should they consider taking action? And obviously you can't control everything beyond the grave, but if you're leaving someone this asset, and Bitcoin really does turn into what we believe Bitcoin can, then they're going to be very appreciative of that, and it can be generational wealth for them. And so, laying this out and them understanding what your intentions were, what your hopes were, what your plans were, might, influence them to continue to follow that. We've probably all experienced this to some extent, but you talk to someone who had a loved one pass away and they say, oh, well, this is what they would have wanted. And that's really what you're trying to communicate here is this is what they would have wanted. And they're more likely to listen to that if you are able to communicate that clearly in the documentation that you would provide.
Yeah, I love that. Hey? And the one thing I've actually done within my own estate plan is I've said explicitly that hopefully by the time I pass away, there will be a plethora of options where one can borrow against your Bitcoin and at an affordable rate without creating a taxable event. And I want those explored and exhausted before you consider selling a single sat, because this is, and I wrote down, this is Manhattan real estate in the sort of 19th, early 20th century. This is stuff that we want to encumber this and borrow fiat currency in something that is just completely losing value over time. And this is appreciated over time. So do not sell it unless it's absolutely necessary. So my hope is, and my expectation, frankly, is that there will be these tools available, and that for many of us, a relatively small position size in Bitcoin in 20 years' time is going to be a game changer. Because I don't know what your sort of, I'm not going to push you with a price prediction, but the way with your financial background, I'd be keen to get if you if you like this thesis. But I had a look at
Sure.
the Magnificent Seven and how they've performed since the IPO to date. And, something like an Apple, last time I checked, was sort of, high 20%, like say, I think it was 27 or 28% CAGR for like 45 years. I mean, their IPO was, it's older than me, frankly. So,
Mhm.
I'm thinking to myself, is Bitcoin a bigger idea than Apple? Is it bigger than, Tesla and all these things? I think so. So I think 30% CAGR is pretty reasonable for the next 20 years, which would put it at like 13 million US in 20 years. And of course we can say, yeah, what's 13 million going to buy you? Yes, less stuff than 13 million today, but it's still going to be meaningful. And I think that you'll be able to live a really good quality of life with a relatively small position size. I don't know if you share that sentiment in terms of a CAGR, or what are the conversations you have with clients?
Yeah, that's a good that's a good question. What I will say is, a lot of people that we're working with, they are near or entering retirement. Usually that transition of retirement is where they reach out to us and like our help. And the biggest risk, in my opinion, to Bitcoiners who are nearing or in retirement is that this takes a lot longer than we think to play out. And by what I mean by that is the Bitcoin thesis that we might have, whether that's arriving at a Bitcoin standard, or maybe it is achieving a 30% CAGR over a long period of time, or whatever price target you might have in mind. Like, I just think that this is going to take longer than we think. And that's the biggest risk. Is it's not necessarily Bitcoin goes to zero or it's quantum or anything like that. It's that, what you think is going to happen in 5 years actually takes 20. And when you're living off of this in retirement, you don't exactly have that cushion to be wrong by 15 years, let's say.
Yeah.
So to your point, I think that Bitcoin is really going to look like a high performing index fund into the future, in my opinion. That could change. And I've talked with a lot of people that think differently about this. And there are some catalysts that could change that. But at least based on what I'm seeing now, we're seeing the CAGR increase in the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq, stuff like that. We're seeing like 13% over the past 5 to 10 years, CAGR wise. So I could see Bitcoin being anywhere from 15 to 20 to maybe 25 on the very high side. I think assuming a 30% CAGR is, a little too much in my opinion, but I always prefer to take a conservative approach. Now, the other thing that people have to think about when you're thinking about a CAGR or price target or whatever else that's 10, 15, 20 years out is the path that it takes to get there. A lot of people don't think about that because, an asset could stay completely flat for 10 years. And then on the last year, all of a sudden it goes up thousands of percent. And now it had a CAGR of 30%.
Yeah.
But it did nothing for 10 years, and it's kind of like if you've looked at gold relative to the S&P 500, there are these decades where gold just does nothing. 2000 to 2010, gold did really well. Then we had 2010 and 2020, really, maybe even 2022 is kind of when it started. Gold did nothing. It was just a decade of going nowhere. And people would have given up on it. A lot of people probably did give up on it over that time frame. But then all of a sudden, 2023 through 2020 here today, gold went on this massive run that nobody really expected. And so that path dependency is something that is very important to make sure you're protecting yourself against, at least in our client's case, thinking about living off of their assets over their retirement. Because, yeah, you might get 10 years worth of average returns that don't look like anything and it lulls people to sleep. And then all of a sudden, maybe we get some type of event that happens that makes Bitcoin worth a lot more than it was just the year prior.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a 6102 attack or something again, to where maybe the USD price doesn't really matter anymore. It's more so the value that Bitcoin is supposed to provide, which is sovereignty, peer-to-peer cash, decentralized network that's permissionless. Maybe there is a secondary market now for Bitcoin where people are much happier to transact in Bitcoin than dollars because the system has become so tyrannical. Maybe that happens. So there's a lot of different scenarios that play out. And my point with going through all that, I know I'm getting a little long winded, is just even if you're right on the cager over the next 20 years, the path that it takes to get
Mm.
there is something that could either make or break you. And maybe it's not flat for 10 years like gold. Maybe it's extreme volatility. If we get,
That's more
okay,
likely,
yeah,
Mitch. I mean, that's the
yeah,
reality. Like,
exactly.
because if you just pick two distinct points in time and say, what's the K between in that period? Like, let's say 69,000 April 21, and then like, let's say April 2026, like literally we're down virtually. And you're like, hold on,
Yeah.
this is the scarcest asset on earth. But what's more interesting is the average K over that period. But to your point, if you're at this stage in your life where you are on the cusp of retirement or you're retired, you are no longer looking to hit home runs. You're looking just to play. It's a cricket term, but forward defensive cricket. Like you're just trying to take the safe runs. You're not trying to knock it out the park because when you do that, you're exposing yourself and your future. So what you'd rather do is say, hey, I'm not chasing these massive winners. I'm actually now just trying to ensure that I can have a great quality of life because that's the whole point of this. I mean, what's the point of dying with a ton of money if you've had to go through an incredible pain and you can't enjoy the benefits? So, yeah, I think the path dependency is going to be the key thing. And there's a 0% chance that Bitcoin is going to be nice and linear and 30%, and we can just enjoy it and relax. It's going to be helter skelter, and you just got to hold on to your hat. But I think in the long arc of time, it will be the most valuable asset. But I think for people who you talk to, probably they've got to really think carefully about obviously position size and how they want to play it because at the end of the day, like if you're all in on Bitcoin and you're on the cusp of retirement and it does this whatever 50-60% now, you've literally just like, oh my gosh, this is painful. All right, one last question before we roll, and I think I'm really grateful for your time here, Mitch. We've just run over time, but I think this has been such a good convo. What is the one thing people should be doing if they've got nothing? Like, let's imagine, someone's listening to that and they don't have a plan, they don't have a will. What is the single most important thing they can do today to get the ball rolling, like to get off zero? What would you recommend?
They need to act like they're going to die tomorrow.
Phew. Harsh but true.
Yeah, I mean it's not they. A lot of people that I talk to, they know they should do it, but they don't. They know it's important, but they haven't done it yet. They know that the it's kind of one of those things that it's important, but it's not urgent, and so a lot of times life just kind of sweeps us up, and urgent tasks take our attention, and then once something happens, it's too late. And so when you're building an estate plan, you have to act as if you're going to die tomorrow. What would need to happen in order for things to play out the way that you want? Making that assumption. And so when you put that urgency on it, that helps you to your point, get off zero and actually take action on your estate plan. Obviously there's a lot of resources out there for help, whether it's reaching out to us, whether it's reaching out to you, reaching out to these other providers. Just take one step forward. And I feel like having that urgency is what will help do that. Because if you don't do that, there's a lot of exposure and vulnerability that you're introducing to your family, to your kids, to the people that you love. And if you want them to be vulnerable, that's one choice. But I know most Bitcoiners, they know they need to do it. They just don't think that they're going to die tomorrow. They think it'll never happen. But we've heard stories, on X. You've heard people
Mm.
share stories of Bitcoiners that unexpectedly passed away in whatever form or fashion. Um, that might be. And I'm sure a lot of people in our lives have, we've had friends, family pass away unexpectedly. It does happen,
100%.
and you have to pretend it's going to happen to you tomorrow in order to actually get off of the couch and make it happen.
There we go. Well, it's not the most uplifting note, but it's encouraging. It's certainly encouraging because it's like, do something, whether it's talking to me, whether it's talking to you, or talking to anyone, just do something. You got to get going. You can't sit on this because this is urgent business, ladies and gentlemen. Awesome. Mitch, give the audience just a handle for like where they can find you and what the type of problems they might be encountering and how you can assist.
Absolutely. The biggest things that we help clients with is retirement strategy, estate planning, and asset management. So, we're going through those primary areas. And, where they can find us is strongwealth.net. That's our website. You can learn more about our services. There's also links to free resources. One that's specifically useful to this conversation is I offer a free estate planning resource going through these three pillars. It's a lot of what we talked about today, but if you'd like to read a little bit more about it, you can go download that for free on our website and get access to that there. Also, through our website, you'll be able to find me on X and YouTube as well. So go to strongwealth.net and be able to find everything from there.
Legend. Awesome, Mitch. It's been such a pleasure. I've learned a lot, and I hope the audience found this valuable. I'm actually confident that they will. So, yeah, perhaps we'll touch base in a little while and see how things have, how the lay of the land looks like. Awesome. On that note, thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
All right, that's the show. If this made you think, made you uncomfortable, or just made you realize that you've been procrastinating, good. Now I'd like to ask a favor of you. Comment and let me know where you're at. Share this with a friend who's still trying to figure it out. And subscribe, because the algo rewards me for those 5 seconds of effort, and that enables me to keep doing this, making sure no Bitcoiner takes their wealth to the grave because they didn't have a plan in place. This has been The Sovereign Life, and don't forget, your family's future depends on what you do today, not someday. The Sovereign Life is proudly presented by My Bitcoin Will. Protect your Bitcoin, protect your family. Visit mybitcoinwill.com for more information.